What's up guys, hope you're having a good day. In this video we're going to be taking a deep dive into each of the main card fights taking place this weekend at UFC 305 from a betting perspective. I've put many hours of research into analysing each of these fights, and I'm really hoping that you're going to be able to use the information in this video to make better betting decisions, maybe even earn some extra cash. If you do like these breakdown videos, don't forget that you can watch breakdown videos for all the prelim fights on this card and on every single UFC card over on my website, MMABettingTips.com. You can use these videos as strategy guides if you're thinking of placing your own bets on some of the prelim fights, and also if I'm betting any of the prelim fights, I'll obviously mention that in the videos for those prelim matchups. So check out my website, there's a link in the description below. Also, we're about to enter a golden age in UFC live betting. UFC live betting is what I specialize in. As you can see here, we've made a profit on approximately 70% of UFC events over the last 8 years. We make a profit most months. We've been absolutely crushing it throughout the history of live betting, and there's been quite a big change fundamentally to UFC live betting recently, which means we're about to enter into another golden age and an amazing opportunity to live bet the sport. So where you see these huge profitable runs here, massive uptrends, massive winning streaks, something recently has changed, which I won't go into in a YouTube video because I kind of want to keep it private, but something big has changed, which means we are very likely to hit another big winning streak very soon. And when we kind of have these winning streaks, they tend to last a while. I think our last one we went something like 24-2 on bets. I wouldn't be surprised if something like that happens now moving into the end of the year. We're going to make a lot of money. So if you're interested in live betting on the UFC, if you watch every event live, check out my live betting group. You will love it. I promise you that. You will absolutely love it. There's a link for that in the description below as well. If you have any questions about it, just jump in my Discord or send me an email and we can have a chat about it. But if you do go to my website, there's a video here which basically shows you what my live betting group is like with an example of a fight that we've live bet. So you can kind of see what it's like. I think you will love it. Give it a try. Now let's break down the main event of UFC 305, which is going to be Dricus du Plessis versus Israel Adesanya. An absolutely amazing fight. And I want to say a big thank you to everyone that helped me research this one in Monday's live stream. So we did a 3-hour live stream researching this fight collectively as a group, and you guys really helped me out by dropping major knowledge, helping me kind of figure this matchup out. The stream got very long, so I could feel myself kind of running out of energy, which wouldn't have been a very good viewing experience for you guys watching the stream. And I didn't get through all the fights that I wanted to research on the stream, so I took a break, went and got some food, came back and researched a couple more fights myself that wouldn't be on the stream, and those fights were Israel Adesanya versus Marvin Vettori, and also Dricus du Plessis versus Robert Whittaker. So that's just a couple more matchups that I've watched to help me kind of figure this one out that aren't on the stream, but a big thank you to everyone that helped me through that. So let's start off by taking a look at the odds on this one. So the odds are getting closer and closer to being dead even. Earlier in the week, Izzy was a slight favourite, but on some betting sites that is no longer the case. But we will say he is still the favourite at average odds of about 1.85, which is going to be minus 118 for an implied probability of 54%. If we take a look at the odds on du Plessis, he's going to be around an average of say 1.95, which is going to be minus 105 for an implied probability of 51%. So du Plessis is 30 years old, 6'1" with a 76-inch reach. Israel Adesanya, the last style bender, 34 years old, 6'4" with an 80-inch reach. So we can see that both guys are, there are some subtle differences here in the tail of the tape that I think we need to talk about. So Izzy is getting quite old for a middleweight. 35 years old is about that stage in your career where you can start to decline. He has had 27 pro MMA fights, and on top of that, God knows how many kickboxing matches, probably a lot. Dricus du Plessis, on the other hand, is only 30 years old. He's in his prime, and he's going to be making big improvements from fight to fight. And we're not just saying that. He is making big improvements from fight to fight. Every time we see du Plessis, he looks exponentially better than his last fight. So we know that the rate of improvement, the career trajectory at the moment for du Plessis is pretty incredible, whereas for Izzy, potentially plateauing a little bit at the age of 35 years old. One more thing that I do want to say about Izzy is obviously he didn't perform to his full potential against Sean Strickland. I think we can all agree that we know Izzy is capable of a lot more than what he showed in the Strickland fight. And for me, he was just very gun shy, very timid, very tentative, didn't really let his hands go, which was unusual because, you know, I can understand, you know, if you perform like that against someone like Alex Pereira, where you don't want to overcommit and eat a big shot, because the power from someone like Pereira can make you very reluctant to open up and attack your opponent. But with someone like Strickland that doesn't have really too much power in his hands, it was quite a surprising, bizarre performance from Izzy. Now, after the fight, you know, on his press tour, doing interviews, speaking to Ariel Helwani on the MMA Hour, Israel Adesanya and his team, his coach, basically said it was an off night for Izzy. He wasn't feeling it. His head just wasn't in the game. And, you know, it was just a bad night at the office for him, basically. And that's what his team put it down to. Now, we're not betting on robots, and that is more than likely true. I have bad days at the office. I make mistakes. There are nights, you know, in live betting where I don't perform well. But there could also be something else going on with Izzy that I think is worth a conversation. So when you look at, you know, guys with look, there aren't any fighters who are similar to Israel Adesanya in UFC history, right? He's his own fighter, he's his own style, and no one has really, you know, performed like him over the years. However, when you look at very technical strikers like Anderson Silva or Lyoto Machida, which are kind of, I would put them into the same sort of box as Israel Adesanya, you know, very technical, very high-level strikers. What you notice about very technical, high-level strikers when they reach the stage in their careers where they decline is that they do become very timid, very tentative, and gun-shy. And I think this is because they, you know, when you're the style of striker that Adesanya or an Anderson Silva or a Lyoto Machida is, you rely so much on your speed, your reflexes, and athleticism, and those are some of the first things that go. So I think when you see guys like Izzy start to be very timid and tentative and struggle to pull the trigger, it can often be an early sign that they're on a steep decline, because they probably still see the openings, but they can't think and react as quickly as they could earlier in their career, which means before they've seen the opening, the opportunity to land a shot has gone, therefore they don't throw it. And this is definitely something we saw with Anderson Silva, Lyoto Machida, and countless other very technical strikers over the years. I mean, Robbie Lawler, I wouldn't put him into the same kind of category as an Izzy or an Anderson Silva, but you remember Robbie Lawler as well. He used to be very aggressive, high volume, high pressure fighter, and then later on in his career, very tentative, very gun shy, and really struggled to pull the trigger in fights. He lost his kind of volume, his aggression, his output, all that kind of stuff. It happens to fighters on a decline. So it could have just been a bad night at the office for Izzy, but it could, at 35 years old, 27 pro fights, a lot of kickboxing fights on top of that, probably over 50 pro fights in both sports combined. Yeah, it is something to think about. Izzy could be on a bit of a decline. However, one thing that is worth talking about in the context of this fight is the potential for performance-enhancing drug use to influence how both these guys look coming into this matchup. So I'm not accusing any fighter in particular of anything. I'm not specifically accusing neither Israel Adesanya nor Dricus du Plessis of using performance-enhancing drugs. But what I will say is, since the beginning of this year, there has been no performance-enhancing drug test. Well, there's been very little performance-enhancing drug test in the UFC. It's basically gone back to what it was like before USADA, where guys would get popped for taking performance-enhancing drugs every once in a while. But like Chael Sonnen famously said, you know, this is drug testing in the sport at the moment is going to be more like passing an IQ test than an actual drugs test. So it's a lot easier to use performance-enhancing drugs now than it has been in the last few years. And we've seen pretty strong evidence, in my opinion, that performance-enhancing drug use is now coming back into the sport in a pretty major way. Ovin St. Preux, in his 40s, put in one of the best performances of his career, in my opinion, against Kennedy and Chukwu. Jose Aldo put in one of the best performances of his career earlier this year against Jonathan Martinez in his mid-20s. Carlos Diego Ferreira put in one of the best performances of the last few years against Mateus Rebecki. Belal Muhammad's body completely transformed, and the physicality he has with his grappling completely transformed for his fight against Leon Edwards when you compare him to his matchup against guys like Vicente Luque. So again, I'm not singling out or accusing any of these guys of doing anything, but when you have a lot of examples of fighters rapidly improving, who are like established and older, then that trend kind of builds, and we've got to kind of put two and two together and try and work out what the most likely reason for that is. And I think that's because performance enhancing drug use is probably rife within the sport again. So in the case of Dricus du Plessis and Israel Adesanya, I actually think both these guys are candidates for potentially using performance enhancing drugs. The reason why I say that with du Plessis is because he is quite big, muscular, physically imposing guy, but he's also making massive improvements from fight to fight, like rapid improvements. When you look at the version of him we saw against Sean Strickland and compare it to the version of him we saw against Darren Till and Derek Brunson, it's like looking at a different human. And again, that's more than likely down to the nose surgery he had to correct his breathing, which has since improved his cardio. But even when you look at his offensive wrestling technique in the Strickland fight compared to his fights against Till and Brunson, it was just exponentially better. And having nose surgery, it's not really going to rapidly improve your technique like that, whereas being able to train much harder for longer using performance enhancing drugs potentially is. So again, I'm not going to accuse du Plessis of anything. We don't know. I just think performance enhancing drug use is rife in the UFC at the moment, so we need to talk about it. And in the context of du Plessis, this could mean he looks a hell of a lot better this weekend again than he has done in the past. And I would expect him to anyway, because the rate at which he's improving. But also, there's been a lot of accusations from various people within the sport and outside of the sport, with guys like More Plates, More Dates, accusing Israel Adesanya of using performance enhancing drugs. You're all aware of this. I don't need to go into it in any detail. But obviously, if there is no smoke without fire, and Adesanya has shown signs of performance-enhancing drug use on his body in the past, if he has actually used performance-enhancing drugs in the past, then, during a time when there is USADA drug testing in the sport, now that there is no USADA drug testing in the sport, you would think that if Izzy was on PEDs before, he's almost certainly going to be on them now. And so that could mean we see one of the best versions of Israel Adesanya we've ever seen this weekend, which would be very problematic for Dricus du Plessis, because I think if Izzy is at his best this weekend, this is going to be quite a difficult fight for du Plessis for all the reasons we'll get into when we start the breakdown of skills. So in terms of the size and the reach, we've got Izzy 6'4", 80-inch reach, which means he's a little bit taller than du Plessis with a nice 4-inch reach advantage. And of course, that's pretty huge for a guy like Izzy, because Izzy fights long. He really knows how to use that reach advantage and accentuate that reach. Although there are pros and cons to every body type, and the Strickland fight did show us that Izzy does lack physicality with everything that he does, really, including his strikes, and he was really struggling to hurt Strickland, back him up and get respect in there. Whereas du Plessis, even though he's smaller, he's more compact, he's got an abundance of physicality and an abundance of power, where he may not be as technically skilled as Adesanya, but that physicality, that power, that presence in the octagon can really make a pretty big difference, so in closing the skill gap. So now let's talk about how I see these two matching up from a betting point of view. Well, straight out the gate, I need to, so that I don't waste your time, just let you know that this is one of those really rare fights that comes along every once in a while, and it's not very often I run into a fight like this. But this is one of those really rare fights where I just don't really have a lean either way, and that's okay. That's okay. You know, ultimately, when you look at a fight like this, there are so many different ways that it could play out, and the ways in which it could play out are complicated by the fact that both Plessis and Adesanya are both very inconsistent. So without knowing which version of them you're going to get, makes it very difficult to predict the outcome. But obviously what I can do for you guys is go into this fight on a lot of detail, share all my research with you guys so that you can understand this fight better, so that hopefully if you're thinking of betting this fight, you're just going to find the information in this very useful. Because say for example you're betting Plessis this weekend, I may be able to identify some issues you never thought of, which may make you want to think twice about betting Plessis, and the same goes for Adesanya. This is a very, very complex fight, and ultimately what you've got to accept when you bet on sports is sometimes, most of the time, I would say most of the time, the odds are pretty fucking accurate. And so where you can see the odds moving into the even money odds range, where you can bet both guys at the moment are pretty much the same odds, you know, the bookies, the betting public have moved the odds in a direction which suggests that this is a 50-50 fight that could go either way. And, you know, at the end of the day, if, you know, if the odds on sports were often wrong, like most of the time wrong, then, you know, there wouldn't be so many profitable betting sites and casinos and sports books. So with a fight like this, you've got to be smart and think, you know, if you are betting this fight, do you have an edge? Are you reading this fight correctly? And are you getting a good risk to reward ratio, a good deal for your money? I guess I will cook up a lean by the time I get to the end of the breakdown. I'll let you know like who I lean towards, but it's a very, very difficult fight to bet. What I will say is it's a fantastic fight for live betting. And at the beginning of this video, I was talking about how we're about to enter a golden age in live betting. And I'm telling you right now, if you come back, look at my profitability chart at the end of this year, we're going to have a really good end of this year. There's been a big fundamental change in my live betting group recently, which is going to just enable us to print really, really good gains over the next year. And this is just a really good time to join. These kind of fights are the reason why live betting on the sport of the UFC is such a huge opportunity, because quite often you run into fights like this where you have a massive amount of footage and a massive amount of information on both fighters, and you get a fight which is very complex such as this, which could play out in multiple ways. And the reason why UFC live betting is so profitable and why we perform so well on live betting the UFC over the long term is that while we can research a fight like this and accept that it's a very complex fight that is going to be difficult to predict before the matchup takes place, what we can do is download all the information from the past fights of these two guys, so that when the fight is happening, we can get a really, really strong read on who is more likely to win as the fight's taking place based on what they've done in the past. And where we have all these unanswered questions going into this fight around what version of both guys we're going to get and what certain guys are going to do in both, you know, in certain positions they could find themselves in. We get the answers to all those questions when the fight takes place, and that's what gives us that edge in live betting and enables us to make a profit on just under 70% of UFC events, and what is going to enable us to have a fantastic end of the year in live betting. A massive, massive fundamental change has been made to live betting recently, which means we're about to go and to the moon. So check out the live betting group. This is a real good time to jump on board. Like I say, it's we're about to enter a golden age for live betting on the UFC, and our edge betting fights like this is one of those main reasons. So what I'm gonna do is just dump all my research on you now, all the information that you need to know when it comes to betting this fight. And I really, really hope that this helps some of you out. I'm sorry I can't help you guys out with a bet on this one, but I'm hoping this information will help. Okay. So where do we even begin with this fight? So I tell you what, let's break down the striking first of all, because I guess that is the easiest. I guess that's kind of the easiest aspect of this fight to break down with the least uncertainty, I would say. So, such a complex fight, man. Okay, so I always say, and I say this every week in my Discord group, the only place you will find truth and honesty in this game is in the fight footage, because the fight footage doesn't lie. Past fights show you what is true. And I think there are certain fighters in the UFC that people, like a big percentage of the MMA community, do not understand very well. They don't have a very good read on their skill set. So what I would say to you is, if you're thinking of betting Dricus du Plessis this weekend, I would just go and look at some of his past fights and pay close attention to his striking. Because when you go and watch du Plessis back in the cold light of day, he's a very, very, very low-level striker. He's very sloppy. He throws big, wide winging hooks and is very bad defensively. So I think a lot of people overestimate du Plessis' striking skill set. But there are levels and levels and levels and levels between these two when it comes to striking. And Israel Adesanya is just on a completely different level. Now, even though in terms of technique, Adesanya is on a completely different level, there are certain aspects to du Plessis as a fighter which can close that skill gap. And there are certain aspects to Adesanya which can close that skill gap as well. So, if we think about du Plessis, he's a tough, mean, nasty, aggressive, physically imposing powerhouse that has a strong will to win. He's tough as nails. He's the kind of guy you have to practically kill in order to beat. And he's got no problem biting down on the mouthpiece, coming forward and swinging for the fences. He's an absolute dog. And the value of that in an MMA fighter cannot be understated. Whether du Plessis wins or loses this weekend doesn't matter. What I can tell you about du Plessis is that if you do bet him this weekend, he is absolutely going to show up and fight for your money. He will give it everything. Du Plessis strikes me as the kind of guy that would rather die than lose a fight without giving it his all and giving it his best. You know, we've seen this guy take tons of damage in past fights, be completely gassed out of his mind, be hurt bad, be losing. You know, he's been losing against guys like Darren Till and Derek Brunson, yet he digs deep and finds ways to win. So when you look at a performance from Israel Adesanya against guys like Sean Strickland, where he didn't really show up and perform, didn't really pull the trigger, or against guys like Blachowicz, where he gave up cheap takedowns and just lied on his back and just accepted a loss when the fight was for the light heavyweight title. He could have become a 2-division champ if he would have shown more urgency to get back up to his feet. Or if you look at his fight against Yoel Romero, where, again, very gun-shy, very passive, didn't do a whole lot. He got the win, but very, very unconvincing. You're not going to get those kind of performances from du Plessis, and that is important in the context of betting this fight, because if you do bet du Plessis, you know that he's absolutely going to show up and perform for your money. He's absolutely going to give his best and fight for your money. Whereas if you bet Adesanya this weekend, there's always the risk that he might just not be feeling it. He might have an off night. If he gets hurt, you know, he might kind of check out mentally. If he gets tired, you know, he might check out mentally. Whereas it doesn't matter how tired, how hurt du Plessis gets, how many rounds he's down, he's the kind of guy that's still going to fight till his last breath. And for that reason, I do lean towards du Plessis this weekend. Just because, if you think about this logically, right, if both guys are in the even money odds range at an implied probability of 1.91 minus 110 for an implied probability 52%, and we know with close to 100% certainty that du Plessis is absolutely going to show up and give his best this weekend, but we don't know if Izzy is. You know, if Izzy is feeling it, if Izzy's at his best, yes, a nightmare stylistic matchup with Duplessis, but we've seen Izzy not really perform well in the past and not really feel it. And if that's the case this weekend, then Duplessis is probably going to have that strong enough will to win to take the victory in the belt from him. Or keep the belt, sorry, I should say. So this is one of those fights where I think it's very risky to bet Izzy, because, you know, if you look at his past fights, obviously he's got a lot of wins, right? There's no doubt about that. But a reasonably, if you look at his last 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 fights, right? So he hasn't really shown up and performed very well in 3 of them, in my opinion, against Romero, Strickland, and Blachowicz. So that's like in 35% of his fights, he just hasn't shown up. So 35% of the time, if you bet on Izzy, your money's dead in the water. You've basically got no chance of winning. Without even getting into how these two match up from a stylistic point of view. And that's one of the main reasons why I lean towards Duplessis. He could win this weekend just based on the fact that Izzy might not show up and try to win. It's a factor that you've really, really got to consider if you're betting this fight this weekend. Duplessis is a much safer bet because you know he's absolutely going to fight for your cash. But in terms of how they match up when it comes to striking, Duplessis is a very low-level striker. There are also certain things that Izzy does which make this a pretty bad stylistic matchup for Duplessis on the feet. The first being that Duplessis stands quite flat-footed and square to his opponents, kind of like this. And one of Izzy's best weapons are his leg kicks. We saw him damn near stop Paulo Costa with his leg kicks. And Duplessis kind of stands in a stance where he's going to be wide open to the leg kicks. So Izzy can inflict a lot of damage on Duplessis with legs and body kicks. On top of that, Izzy is usually a pretty slow starter that takes a while to kind of download the information from his opponent and find his range. And during this period of the fight where he's just starting slow, finding his range, he doesn't tend to get into any big exchanges. If you come forward and attack him, he tends to just back up, circle away, and try and get the fight back to distance where he'll just chip away at you with his range-finding kicks. This is a bit of a problem for Duplessis because Duplessis isn't very good at fighting at range because he's very sloppy and has very bad technique. So when Duplessis and Izzy are stood in the middle of the octagon, I don't think Duplessis is going to have any success there because he's not technical enough to land anything on Izzy from distance. From that range, he's just going to get his legs blasted and his body chewed apart with Izzy's range-finding kicking game. So the way in which Duplessis deals with this is he bites down on his mouthpiece and he blitzes forward in straight lines, just loading up on big winging hooks to just try and catch you with a big shot. But Izzy doesn't really play this game early on. Izzy is very, very good at reading when you're about to change levels and come forward and attack. And he's very, very good at backing up and circling away from you. And in those sequences when he is, finding his range in the early stages of the fight, he won't try to counter you very often. He won't try and punish you for that recklessness, but he is very good at evading your strikes and not getting hit, which means Duplessis is going to find it difficult to score points early in this fight with striking. As Izzy starts to find his range and as he tires you out a bit, he will start to stand his ground and fire back with counters. Probably the best example of this was the round 2 knockout of Robert Whittaker. Typically Izzy will take a while to do that. And while Izzy's finding his range, I think Duplessis is going to be taking a decent amount of damage to the legs and the body. But in those early stages of the fight, Izzy doesn't really box. He uses the length from his kicks to just kind of chip away at you, keep you at a safe distance, in a similar way, I guess, to what John Jones used to do. So, on the feet, very, very difficult fight for Duplessis. But we were talking about certain things Duplessis does that could potentially close the skill gap. And the big thing that Duplessis has on his side, which could close the skill gap, is his power, his aggression, his volume, and his tenacity. So one of the big risk factors associated with betting on Israel Adesanya this weekend is that he is quite passive, he is quite tentative at times, And at times he really struggles to put his stamp on fights. He's been involved in a lot of close fights, and the reason why he's been involved in a lot of close fights is that he often just kind of edges his opponents in rounds and doesn't really do very much. He likes to stay on the outside, like I say, and chip away at you with range-finding strikes. That's where there is opportunity for Duplessis to actually have some success with striking, because what I like about Duplessis is that he throws a really high volume of strikes and he's aggressive. He's not that pretty doing it. He's not that technical. You know, he doesn't look good doing it. You wouldn't want to buy the Dricus Duplessis instructional DVD on striking. It's certainly pretty sloppy technique, but at least he throws. At least he's aggressive. At least he lets his hands go, and at least he sits down very hard and commits everything that to the shots that he's throwing. And so even though there's a massive skill gap between the two, if Izzy is kind of trying to fight a very technical fight, kind of circle away from Duplessis and just kind of chip away at him, but Duplessis is coming forward aggressively, loading up on big power shots, it's possible that Izzy doesn't have the power in his hands to get respect in there and back Duplessis up, which is kind of what happened when Izzy fought Strickland. Now, having said that, Strickland's technique and striking defense is a lot better than Duplessis is. Yes, I know that Duplessis beat Strickland, but I think we can all agree, in terms of technique, Strickland's a lot more elusive on the feet than Duplessis. If you go and watch footage of him, you'll see for yourself. And so this could be a situation where Izzy's just not able to get respect in there, and so Duplessis just kind of overwhelms him with his power and physicality. Is possible. I don't think it's that likely because Izzy's still dangerous. Obviously, people forget he did knock out Alex Pereira. But, you know, it is possible. It's absolutely possible. So, that's how these two match up when it comes to striking. Izzy has a huge advantage on the feet, but he does struggle to put his stamp on rounds, and with the way MMA judges can be, that's a dangerous game to play. Now, when it comes to grappling, this fight gets extremely, extremely, extremely interesting, because Dricus Duplessis is making exponential improvements to his grappling from fight to fight. If you look at his offensive wrestling in the Strickland fight compared to the Darren Till fight, you know, these two matchups were, you know, not that far apart, but Duplessis' offensive wrestling had improved an order of magnitude in the space of those fights. And with this fight against Izzy being 8 months after he fought Strickland, you'd expect his offensive wrestling to be even better again. And I think Dricus Duplessis is a very intelligent fighter. He's got good game planning, good strategy. And so, you know, obviously all fighters have got big egos, but I think Duplessis will probably, I think you'll probably know that, you know, trying to outstrike a very high-level kickboxer might not give him the best chance of winning this weekend. And so coming in with a grappling-heavy game plan is going to increase Duplessis' chances of winning this fight by quite a lot. And another way in which just using grappling in this fight can help Duplessis is that it can open up opportunities for him on the feet. So, you know, the thing about Izzy is, and we're going to get into some footage of this, the thing about Izzy is, outside of one bad performance against Jan Blachowicz, Israel Adesanya's takedown defense and ability to work his way back up to his feet when he gets taken down is pretty damn good. And so the problem that Dricus Duplessis has in this fight is, if you look at the big picture in terms of Izzy's takedown offense and ground game, it's not going to be easy for Duplessis to get Izzy down and hold him down. Now, I will caveat that by saying there are certain examples throughout Izzy's career where that isn't true, and I'm going to show you footage of that again to reiterate the fact that Izzy's quite a difficult fighter to read. He's quite inconsistent. But if we're taking a big picture look at this fight, it's not going to be that easy for Duplessis to get Izzy down and hold him down for very long. Although again, that is a complicated statement to make, and this is why live betting this fight is the way to go, man. I don't mean to keep saying it, but if you're not in our live betting group, you should be, because we are about to hit a golden age in live betting, and fights like this are the reasons why we have such a big edge, because it's such a complex fight. There's so many ways this fight could go. There's so many different nuances to the way both of these guys react in certain situations. And when you have that high level knowledge, when you put the hours and hours and hours, we put damn near 4 hours of time into researching this fight. When you understand these fighters on a deep level, that's what gives you the big edge in live betting. That's why over the last 8 years we've made a profit on almost approximately 70% of UFC events. So I need to show you the nuances of Izzy's takedown offense and ground game. But generally speaking, it's not going to be easy for Du Plessis to get him down and hold him down, right? Just accept that for now, and we'll show you a bit of footage in a minute. So the reason why it is important for Du Plessis to grapple in this fight is because it will open up opportunities for him on the feet. The reason being, Du Plessis is a very low-level striker, so Adesanya is probably going to be able to read him very easily. Du Plessis is one of these guys that just kind of blitz forward in straight lines, throwing big wide hooks, and Izzy's going to see those blitzing attacks coming from a mile away, and he's just going to back up and circle away. It's going to be difficult for Du Plessis to get to Adesanya on the feet. However, if Du Plessis starts threatening with takedowns, it doesn't matter if Du Plessis gets the takedowns or not. The threat of the takedown will open up opportunities for him on the feet. Because think about this. If Du Plessis is only striking in the fight, then every time Du Plessis blitzes forward to attack Izzy, Izzy's only going to be focused on defending himself against the strikes, backing up and circling away. It's going to be, much easier to just focus on one thing than if you've got to focus on defending yourself against multiple attacks, right? So think about it. If Du Plessis then throws the threat of the takedown into the mix, every time he blitzes forward, Izzy's going to be in this position where he doesn't know, if a big right hand is coming, or he needs to worry about defending his lower body from the takedown attempt. Because what I will say about Du Plessis is the timing on his takedown entries is very good, and when he commits to his takedowns, he really does fully commit to them and has great timing, great entries. So when Izzy only has to focus on striking, he can stay laser focused, keep his hands in the position he wants to keep his hands in, and use a lot of head movement, footwork to evade Du Plessis' blitzing attacks. But if Du Plessis throws grappling into the mix, then Izzy's got to be thinking about keeping his hands down low to get underhooks in play early if Dricus does shoot, which will basically, leave his upper body, his head more exposed to head strikes. So Du Plessis, even if he doesn't have success with his grappling early in the fight or at any stage in the fight, it will give him the element of surprise. And again, it's another thing Du Plessis can do to close the skill gap on the feet. Because if you try and beat Izzy in a kickboxing match and Izzy is at his best this weekend, this probably isn't going to end well for Du Plessis. So this is one of those matchups where grappling and how much Du Plessis grapples and how much success he has with his grappling is going to have a pretty big influence on who wins this. And so what we need to do now is show you a decent amount of footage on Du Plessis' offensive wrestling, Izzy's takedown offense and ground game, so that you can understand why this fight is incredibly complex from a betting point of view. So let's get into it. Okay, so you probably noticed that the lighting in this room has changed. And that is because I'm recording this part of the video a few hours after the bit that you've just watched. And the reason why it's a few hours later is because I went to pull up the footage of Israel Adesanya versus Robert Whittaker to show you Adesanya's takedown defense when it is at its absolute best. And a lot of MMA fights are really complex. So sometimes you run into fights like this where there are so many different layers to it that you can get really deep with it, right? You can overthink it. And I started going through the Whittaker footage because I've got to I make like some notes on the times of different things to show you. And I start watching it again for a second time, and I'm like, damn. If Izzy actually shows up and performs to his full potential, he should destroy Dricus du Plessis. So I'm going to show you some footage now. Everything that I've said up until this point in this breakdown is still true, is still valid. None of that changes. But after going back and watching some fights again for a second time, I do think Adesanya is the strongest side, to be on to the extent where I'm very, very tempted to bet him. And when I show you the footage that I'm about to show you, I think you will understand why. So, what we're first going to take a look at is Adesanya versus Jan Blachowicz. And this is a really, really important fight because it shows Israel Adesanya at his worst. Because if we bring up UFC stats, right, we can see that Israel Adesanya has 77% takedown defense, which is an impressive statistic considering he's had a lot of fights in the UFC. He's faced a lot of guys that have tried to take him down. He's fought a decent amount of wrestlers as well, to be fair. And it's not easy maintaining a long-term takedown defense stat of 77% when you're consistently competing against the best fighters in your division. Because especially when you're a striker like Izzy, everyone's going to try and take you down, and they do. So Izzy's takedown defense is very, very good, and we'll show you some evidence of that shortly. But one of the things that makes this fight so difficult for betting is that we can't be sure what version of Izzy we're going to get. And we've already spoken about his potential decline, how he put in a strange performance against Strickland. But this performance against Blachowicz was also very, very strange. And let me show you why. So we've already said that Izzy's takedown defense historically is very good. Defended 77% of takedowns. And we've already said that it will be difficult for du Plessis to get him down for reasons that I will show you. But we also got to recognise and acknowledge that we're not betting on robots. And so some fighters are very consistent, some are inconsistent. And one of the great things about du Plessis, like we've said in this breakdown, is that he's very consistent. Izzy has underperformed and been a bit inconsistent in his UFC career. And when I show you the Blachowicz fight and the Whittaker fight side by side, you'll understand what I mean. So, just to qualify what I'm about to show you, obviously Blachowicz is a light heavyweight and Izzy fights at middleweight. So yes, Blachowicz is big and strong, but for me, there is no excuse for what you're about to see. I don't care if Blachowicz weighs twice what Izzy does. There's no excuse for what you're about to see. So like I say in these breakdown videos every single week, it doesn't matter to me whether you have bad takedown defense or not, so long as you can quickly work your way back up to your feet. So this is the fourth round, and Blachowicz hits his first takedown of the fight, drives through on a nice double leg, puts Izzy on his back. Now, Izzy's takedown defense didn't look great there. He got caught flat-footed, put on his back relatively easily. But it's no big deal so long as you can work your way back up to your feet quickly. But what is really concerning about this fight is that when Blachowicz put Izzy on his back, Izzy made absolutely no attempt to work his way back up to his feet. Now, the uneducated will say that Blachowicz is too big and too strong for Izzy. The weight classes played a factor and Izzy just couldn't get up. And what I would say to them is the reason why they're wrong is because it may be true that Blachowicz is too big and strong for Izzy to be able to work his way back up to his feet. I do accept that. But I don't care if Blachowicz is on top of a flyweight. I don't care if he's on top of a female strawweight. What I want to be seeing from the fighter on the bottom is attempts to create make attempts to create space for themselves off their back and work their way back up to their feet. Instead, all Izzy does is kind of hold on to Blachowicz from the bottom and just lie there. He doesn't really make any effort to get back up to his feet at all. It doesn't really make much of an effort to regain guard. Doesn't really make much of an effort to create space for himself off his back. Doesn't, make much of an effort to put his feet on the hips of Blachowicz and try and push off to create a bit of space. There's 2.5 minutes left to go in this fourth round, and if we skip through, you can go watch this for yourself. Izzy just looks very, 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 very weak off his back and just accepts being on the bottom. And yes, I do get that Blachowicz is a big, strong, light heavyweight, but at the same time, he's still giving Izzy a decent amount of space from side control. Izzy should be trying to turn into him, get to his knees and stand back up, but instead, he's doing things like this and just holding on to Blachowicz from the bottom. So we just skip through. Izzy basically makes very, very, very little attempt to get back up to his feet. So that's a huge red flag, because Blachowicz doesn't have a particularly strong ground game, not a particularly heavy top game, and Izzy just basically laid there and allowed Blachowicz to lay on top of him in a very close competitive fight, which was more than likely 2 rounds apiece going into the 5th round. It's a title fight. When there's a title on the line, you'd want someone like Adesanya to show a lot more urgency to work his back up to his feet than what he just showed us. So then this is the 5th round, and again there, look at how bad this takedown offense is. Izzy damn near leaps to the floor here. Very, very poor takedown offense. And Blachowicz gets the takedown at pretty much the same point in the round that he did in the 4th. There's about 2.5 minutes left to go. And again, Izzy just goes to close guard and makes very, very little attempt to get back up to his feet. From this position, as Blachowicz is posturing up, he should be trying to get his feet on the hips of Blachowicz and push off to try and scramble back up to his feet, but he just stays in this closed guard position, grabs a hold of the head of Blachowicz and pulls him into top position. So, shocking. And Izzy just gets held down really easily, and Blachowicz just absolutely dominates in that 4th and 5th round. Just Izzy accepts being on the bottom and looks absolutely terrible. So when you watch that footage, it's difficult to have any amount of confidence in Adesanya at all, right? Because if he gets taken down and put on his back, very easy to hold him down, and any wrestler will have a lot of success against him. So this next fight is a really good example of why MMA is a very tricky sport to bet pre-fight. This is why we have a huge edge live betting, because when you live bet on the UFC, you can see exactly how your fighter is performing, exactly what you're going to get for your money before you put your money in danger and place a bet. That's why we make a profit on approximately 70% of UFC events over the long term. That's why we absolutely do really, really well. It's because of fights like this where we've seen different versions of the same fighter at different stages of their career, and we're able to use our fight research when we're live betting to identify which version of a fighter we've got that particular night, which enables us to predict the most likely outcome of that fight as it's taking place. Hit winning bets. So we've just seen Izzy give up cheap takedowns against Blachowicz and look very, very weak off his back. Now take a look at how different Izzy looks here against Whittaker. Now again, to the untrained eye, the people that don't really understand MMA grappling, again they will say Blachowicz is a light heavyweight, he's a lot bigger, he's a lot stronger than Whittaker. But if you really understand MMA grappling, you'll know it's not the case. There's a lot more going on here. So take a look at the takedown defense from Adesanya in this fight. So we just saw Izzy give up 2 really cheap takedowns against Blachowicz. In that 5th round, he practically leaped to the ground. Take a look at this takedown here, or takedown defense here. So Whittaker shoots a very nicely timed, you see him feinting it there. It's coming any second. He feints it again there. So he is a little bit predictable because he's feinted twice and Izzy's kind of ready for it. But look at that sprawl out of that takedown there from Izzy. Very, very nice. And again, we're just focusing on takedown offense and ground game here. So we'll skip through all this. Breakdown is going to be super, super, super long. But again, check out this takedown entry here. Rob in on an outside trip. Gets Izzy down. And now remember, in the Blachowicz fight, Izzy just basically lied on his back, went to close guard, and was just completely useless off his back, made no attempt to get back up to his feet. Here, he's in a slightly better position than he was against Blachowicz because he's closer to the cage and he can use the cage as a tool to wall walk back up to his feet. But still, pay attention to the difference in Izzy in this position, where he shows so much more urgency to pop back up here than he did against Blachowicz. Look, he's immediately trying to clear his legs out from underneath Rob, and he's already posting with his left hand on the canvas and starts to immediately stand back up. Just slips that right leg out there. He's back up, overhook on the right side, starts fighting for an underhook on the left side, and any second now he's going to be out of trouble. Skip ahead a little bit, there we go, and he's out. So if we keep going, again we're just focusing on the grappling here. Okay, here we go. So another takedown from Rob in round 3. Drives through on that head kick attempt. So this position's really interesting because whereas the other takedowns I've shown you in this fight are closer to the cage, which is going to make it easier for Adesanya to pop back up to his feet, this one is pretty much in the same position in the octagon as where Blachowicz took Izzy down. And remember what Izzy did as soon as Blachowicz took him down. He just immediately went to close guard and accepted being on the bottom. Look at the difference here from Izzy. Immediately goes to the active guard to try and create space for himself off his back. And look how he immediately tries to use his feet to push off Rob to pop back up to his feet. Look at the urgency in real time of Izzy here to kick off Rob and scramble back to his feet, gets to his knees and just stands back up. And again, if Izzy did all those things against Blachowicz but wasn't able to because Blachowicz was too heavy and strong on top of him, I get it, man. I understand size played a massive part in the Blachowicz-Izzy fight. But Izzy didn't show that urgency to scramble back up to his feet against Blachowicz. Therefore, I can't sit here and agree with people that say it was because Blachowicz is so big and strong that Izzy struggled to get back up to his feet. It's just not true if you understand MMA. So here's another position to pay attention to. So this time Whittaker shoots a single leg, turns the corner, gets Izzy down. And again, this is again a similar position to where Izzy was taken down against Blachowicz in the middle of the octagon. And look at his body language. So as Whittaker takes him down here, he immediately pushes down on the head and looks to clear his legs out from underneath Whittaker, immediately gets to his knees and stands back up. Does give his back up, and Whittaker is able to get the back briefly, but Izzy does a really good job of slowly turning in to Whittaker so that Whittaker is shaken off. So again, it's just completely different from Izzy in this Whittaker fight to what he did against Blachowicz. Another takedown entry here. Didn't fully commit to it, didn't really get in too much on the legs. Now if we go to round 5, got a little bit more, nothing too substantial I don't think to show you in this round. Just some takedown attempts here that Rob doesn't really fully commit to. There's one there, but again Izzy does a good job of using his balance to keep the fight upright. He just feeds that single leg to Whittaker and stuffs the takedown. If we keep going, there's another one here. So Rob shoots a nice single leg, drives through, gets Izzy down, but again Izzy immediately gets to his knees, stands back up, digs an underhook on the right side there, starts turning into Rob, and starts to break the grip. Here you can see him hand fighting. See, Izzy just trying to turn into Rob, stay square. Not the smartest idea to throw a knee there, to be honest, but Rob lets it go. And another takedown attempt here from Rob. Nice double leg entry. Izzy does a good job of clearing his legs out from underneath him and using that overhook on the right side to shut the takedown attempt down. And again, just decent takedown defense, good balance in this position from Izzy. Rob tries to drag him to the ground. Good balance, uses his length to post on the canvas, and a little smile from Izzy there. Very happy with his work, and he should be, because that shows massive improvement from Izzy compared to the Blachowicz fight. So this is all pretty huge to me, because if Izzy shows up and performs like that against Duplessis, I think Duplessis is likely going to be in a lot of trouble here. And I will show you some footage of why. We'll also bring Izzy's Instagram up, because we're going to need that in just a little bit. But the reason why I think this is going to be a very, very difficult fight for Duplessis if Izzy shows up and performs to his full potential is because Duplessis' grappling isn't the best. There, I said it. So we're going to use the same timeline that we used for Izzy, where we show the oldest fight first and we work our way through to the most recent fight. So we're going to start with Duplessis versus Till, and we're starting with this fight because then you can see like the improvement in Duplessis' offensive wrestling and ground game as we move closer to his most recent fight against Strickland. And he is making exponential improvements from fight to fight, there's no doubt about that, but still ground game not the best. So here we go. So you can see some wrestling here from Duplessis. So shooting on a double leg there, gets it easily. But what I want you to really pay attention to in the footage of Duplessis that I'm going to show you is how his grappling control isn't very good. So he has this reputation for being like a big, strong, physically imposing, tanky guy. But he doesn't really have much physicality to his grappling. And you can tell he doesn't have much physicality to his grappling because whenever he is grappling, his opponents are able to move around a lot and create a lot of space for themselves when he's trying to take them down or drag them down or beat them up in the clinch. And you see that here. So Duplessis hits the takedown and Till's immediately able to get to his knees and scramble over to the cage. So whenever you see a guy able to move around a lot like Till is now, when his opponent is trying to wet blanket them in a grappling position, it's just basically a sign that the person in the grappling position doesn't have the best grappling control. If you think about someone with crushing grappling control like a Damian Maia or a Khabib Nurmagomedov, when they would get close to you and stick to you like glue, you couldn't move around like this. So Duplessis has a lot of success with his grappling in this first round, but it says more about the poor decisions that Till made in this round as opposed to things that Duplessis did well. And again, there are people that will disagree with me on this, but unfortunately they're wrong. If you understand MMA grappling, what I'm about to explain to you about this position is like undeniable. So what you can see here is Darren Till accepting being in a bad position. If you're in my live betting group, we talk a lot about fighters that accept being in bad positions. And what I mean by accepting being in a bad position is a fighter that stays in a position where they're losing without showing urgency to improve their position or work through it. That's exactly what we see here. Duplessis doesn't have anything in this position. He doesn't have control of Till's body, doesn't have control of his legs. He literally just smashes Till from this position. And he has nothing, like absolutely nothing. If Till wants to stand up and turn into Duplessis, get to the clinch, or try to circle his back off the cage, he can. Because Duplessis doesn't have control of anything here. He goes back to getting control of the leg now. But Till has put himself in this position because he's just hesitating here. Look, Duplessis doesn't have anything in this position. Doesn't have control of the body, doesn't have control of the legs. At times he briefly gains control of the legs, but very, very briefly. Till just stays here for no reason and just gets absolutely smashed. So if you think about what we've just seen from Adesanya in the Whittaker fight, obviously when Izzy would scramble over to the cage, he showed a lot of urgency to turn into Whittaker and circle out of positions like this. So where you see Duplessis kind of smashing Darren Till from this back control position, a lot of people will get excited about that and think that Dricus Duplessis is some kind of amazing grappler that can do this to Izzy. And I'm not saying he can't do that to Izzy, but Izzy would have to make a choice to stay in this position like Darren Till is. Till is choosing to be here. Duplessis is not keeping him here. Like, look at this. Till is just choosing to stay here and get smashed. It makes absolutely no sense. Like, look at this position, for fuck's sake. It's insane. It's insane. Yes, Duplessis got a hold of Till's right arm, but it doesn't stop Till from turning into Duplessis, you know, to his left, or trying to scramble away from there. He's just, look at this. He's literally just stood there allowing Duplessis to hammer him. It's just a bizarre position that you never see in MMA. And there's just no need for Till to be here. And we'll skip through because it goes on for a while. And, you know, it's going to make the breakdown video super long if we make a big deal out of this. But anyway, Duplessis backing on a double leg. And again, very weak offensive wrestling. Whenever you see a guy drop to their knees like this, they're never going to get a takedown against anyone with takedown defense, or anyone that knows how to defend a takedown when you drop to their knees like this. When you drop to your knees like that, it's usually because you're exhausted. And Duplessis is probably adrenaline dumped with all that ground and pound. Now, Till does give up the takedown because he's got terrible fight IQ and very bad takedown defense. But you can see that Duplessis' takedown is very laboured there. His offensive wrestling is very laboured. Then Till gives his back up. Duplessis gets his back, continues to smash him. All good stuff. But because Duplessis got quite a low-level ground game, he lets go of the body triangle until does finally show a bit of urgency, turn into Duplessis, pop back up to his feet, which is very, very nice. Then for whatever reason, starts rolling for chokes and shit. But that's basically round one. Here you can see how sloppy Duplessis is on the feet. Gives up a cheap takedown. But anyway, we're just focusing on grappling here. So if we go into round two, there's not really a whole lot of grappling in round two from memory. Or at least there's not a whole lot of grappling that Duplessis has success with. So, shoots a single leg here. Till gets taken down. But again, remember what I said about Duplessis not having particularly strong, physically imposing grappling. When someone can move around on the ground after you've taken them down with you on top of them, it just means you haven't got particularly heavy top game, good grappling control. We see that here. Look, Till easily gets to his knees and can move around no problem, even with Duplessis having this body lock. Till scrambles over to the cage, elevates him with a butterfly hook. And stands back up. So you can see Duplessis just doesn't have that kind of crushing grappling control that a lot of people think he does. Again, here towards the end of round two, another takedown attempt. Till just feeds him the single leg. Duplessis eventually gets it, but again, look at how easily Till can move around on the bottom. Look how easily he can move around on the bottom. You know, a lot of space in there for Till on the bottom. Look how much space is in there for Till to scramble back up to his feet. And he rolls for a leg. But yeah, basically the point I'm trying to make is Duplessis doesn't have that kind of crushing physicality to his grappling, to the extent where if he gets on top of Izzy is going to struggle to move around and work his way back up to his feet. So we've got that fight, the Darren Till fight, but remember what I said. Duplessis is making big improvements to his offensive wrestling. So now let's take a look at his most recent fight against Sean Strickland. And what you notice about his improvements in the Strickland fight is that he has much better timing on his takedown entries, much better technique, and he's also integrated inside-outside trips with very good effect, which is something we didn't see from him against Darren Till, which is why he did struggle with some of those takedowns in rounds 2 and 3. So again, just like I showed you with the Duplessis versus Darren Till fight, I want you to pay attention to how easily Strickland can move around on the bottom after Duplessis takes him down. So remember, this is Duplessis' last fight, so this is probably the best representation of, or best reflection of the version of Duplessis we're going to get this weekend. So he shoots a real nice double leg there, drives Strickland into the cage, hands connected together, he inevitably gets it. But look, straight away, Strickland can scoot his butt over to the cage, move around on the bottom, and start to stand back up. Look at this, he literally just stands back up here any second. Now, when did you ever see anyone just stand back up when Khabib takes them down? Duplessis drags him back to the ground off the body lock, but again, no physicality to Duplessis grappling, so Strickland immediately just stands back up. So if we go into round 2, so a takedown right at the end of round 2. Nice single leg entry. Strickland gives up the cheap takedown, but again, similar to what we saw in round 1, Strickland moves around a lot on the bottom and just starts to stand back up. And this is while, you know, Duplessis does have full control of his legs as well. You can see Strickland just straight back up. So again, it just shows that Duplessis' grappling control just not good. I don't think there's much grappling in round 3. Then we get more grappling in rounds 4 and 5. Let's take a look at that. Okay, here we go. Another takedown attempt here in round 4. So nice outside trip, and that's a massive improvement that we've seen in Duplessis' game. In none of his past fights, he was using inside and outside trips. He had good timing on his takedown entries, but if his opponent stuffed that initial single leg and double leg in past fights, he would struggle to get them down. Now, even if his opponent does a pretty good job of dealing with the initial entry, just mixing in those inside-outside trips gives him a much higher probability of completing takedowns. But again, even though Strickland was taken down, look at how easily he's able to move around on the bottom here. Look, Strickland immediately starts scooting his butt over to the cage. And even though Duplessis has got full control of the body, he cannot stop Strickland from moving around and just literally standing back up. So all these are strong clues that Duplessis' grappling control is not good. Duplessis' grappling control is not good. And then they're back to the middle of the octagon. So again, another takedown coming up any second. Nice double leg entry, drives through, gets it. Strickland, same as before, starts moving around on the bottom and starts to stand back up. You can see by now Strickland is exhausted, but even with Duplessis having full control of his body, Strickland is able to easily stand back up. And Duplessis drags him down again. Any second. And then you can see Strickland just immediately stands back up. When a guy has strong grappling control, the person they're taking down doesn't stand back up like that. You know, you can really see that Duplessis lacks physicality to his grappling. He just doesn't have a heavy top game or particularly good grappling control. And this is a problem for someone like Duplessis, because when you cannot hold guys down because you don't have the physicality or grappling control, it means you have to burn a lot of energy on takedowns to not achieve very much. So when you have to exert all this energy to take your opponent down only to see them quickly work back up to their feet, you don't really score points off that, but you do burn through a lot of energy, which makes everything else that you're trying to do a lot less effective. So that video footage there for me, when we look at the Whittaker fight and the footage of Duplessis, was just to kind of highlight to you that I do think it's going to be very, very difficult for Duplessis to use his wrestling in this fight if Israel Adesanya shows up with the kind of defensive wrestling that we saw from him in his fight against Robert Whittaker. This is where things get complicated, right? And this is where the gambling element of this fight comes into play. Because if you said to me right now that you have a crystal ball and you can see into the future, and Dricus Duplessis will show up and perform exactly like he did against Sean Strickland, and Israel Adesanya would show up and perform exactly like he did against Robert Whittaker, I would place one of my biggest bets of the year on Israel Adesanya to win this fight. I think if Izzy shows up like he did against Whittaker, aggressive on the feet, showing urgency to work through grappling positions when taken down, I think he absolutely smokes Du Plessis and exposes him on a level that people backing Du Plessis are not really prepared for. Because I think people backing Du Plessis in this fight with a lot of confidence are ignoring a lot of the issues with his overall skill set, and they are significantly underestimating what Israel Adesanya is capable of. And for me to really hit home the point about how out of his depth Du Plessis could be in this fight if the best version of Adesanya shows up, I want to show you a bit of footage from both guys. So the first bit of footage I'm going to show you is actually of Dricus du Plessis versus Mr. Sean Strickland again, because obviously once again his most recent fight gives us the best, most accurate indication of what to expect from him this weekend. And also, to paint Du Plessis in the best light possible, we're going to show him early in a fight. So this isn't later on in a fight where he's looking sloppy and tired. This is the beginning of round 2 when he's relatively fresh. So all I want you to do here is pay attention to how sloppy and low level Dricus du Plessis' striking is. And again, the problem with striking is we have to show a decent amount of footage for you to really appreciate how low level Du Plessis is, whereas with grappling we can skip through and just show specific positions for it to make sense. But what I want you to pay attention to with Du Plessis is how sloppy he is offensively, how slow his hand speed is, how inefficient his striking is, how he throws random spinning attacks every once in a while, how he's not that accurate, and how he is like random like spinning attacks like that, very slow, very predictable, and just there's a real flatness to everything that Du Plessis does. So he's very flat on the feet. And again, this is only the beginning of round 2. This is not like deep in a fight where he's tired and all that kind of stuff. He's one of these guys that is just very, very flat, very sloppy, and pretty low level. So we'll play a few minutes of this, and then I will show you some footage of Izzy striking. So again, just like you can watch grappling of both of them side by side, you can watch striking of both, and you can see how much trouble Du Plessis is likely going to be in on the feet. You can see Strickland just reading everything. Like what a like spinning attacks like that and throwing lazy overhand rights. Those are the kind of sloppy techniques that will get you sent to the Shadow Realm against Izzy. Maybe not at first, because Izzy's a slow starter. It will take time for him to get reads on Du Plessis. But once he has started to get reads on, Du Plessis overcommitting to these really sloppy strikes, that's where Izzy can really start to pick him off. So you can just see, Du Plessis throws heavy, slow arm punches, really lacks efficiency with his striking, and just very low level striking, man. Very, very, very low level. Again, I don't want to drag this breakdown video out and make it super, super, super long. I know it's already pretty long, but obviously, if you think, what the fuck did Du Plessis just do there? Like, what is this? What is that? Like, that's the type of stuff that can get you knocked out against Izzy, because you make mistakes like that, lazy little spinning attacks, you can walk right into a head kick. So Du Plessis, very, very, very low level striker. And again, you can go do your own research, you can go watch more footage, you can go watch more fights. If you disagree, if you don't believe me, that's on you. Now, the footage that I want to show you is of Izzy's rematch in the UFC against Alex Pereira. And again, we're going to show footage from the same stage in the fight, round 2. Because what we see in round 2 from Izzy is very, very, very interesting. Because in this second round, so the first round of this fight is kind of like a chess match where both guys show each other a lot of respect and they both stand in the middle of the octagon and just chip away at one another with range-finding strikes. But in this second round, Pereira thinks, fuck this, I'm just going to really take the fight to Izzy and get aggressive and walk him down and look to take him out. Now, we've all seen how devastating Pereira's been in the light heavyweight division. Some of his brutal knockouts to guys like Jiri Prohaska and, of course, Jamal Hill. But look at how well Izzy handles him in this round. So Pereira comes out super aggressive in round 2, walks Izzy down, traps him in this uncomfortable range up against the cage. And you can see Izzy's just patient, doesn't panic, just, continues to try and circle away. And what I really like about Izzy in this second round is, as soon as Pereira eases off the gas, Izzy gets on him. Izzy just walks him down, really starts to put it on him. So you can see Pereira wants to be the aggressor in this round, but he's struggling because every time he doesn't sustain the pressure, Izzy gets right on top of him. And this is really, really significant because I think we can all agree, I think even the biggest Dricus du Plessis fans can agree, that Alex Pereira is levels and levels and levels above du Plessis when it comes to striking, particularly from the footage that I've just shown you. So what I find interesting about this round is that Pereira couldn't really get near Izzy in this round. Izzy totally outclassed him, totally handled him, picked him apart, and dealt with all the pressure that Pereira threw at him just fine. Pereira barely lands a clean hard head strike in this round. And so if you imagine how comfortable Izzy is at handling one of the best fighters in the world, Alex Pereira, not that long ago, this fight took place, when was it? I think like 2023, right? Yeah, so this fight took place about 18 months ago. When you look at how comfortable Izzy was at handling one of the best strikers alive right now in MMA, and then you look at the footage I've just shown you of how low level du Plessis is, like if Izzy shows up and he's at his best this weekend, du Plessis will not be able to take him down and hold him down, and I think he will get absolutely schooled on the feet, like bad, because when Izzy is capable of handling Pereira as well as this, imagine what he can do to a guy with slow hand speed, sloppy technique, throws random, uncomfortable, awkward low level. Izzy will eat du Plessis alive. And this round is really important because Pereira tries to pressure Izzy in this round, just like du Plessis will try to pressure Izzy as well. But Pereira is not able to sustain the pressure on Izzy because he cannot do it in a safe way without eating big counters. And he can't get near Izzy when he does pressure. Like, look, he's coming forward now trying to pressure, but he can't land anything in these positions. Izzy's just too quick, too technical. He's too good at reading him. Pereira's trying to be the aggressor here. He's trying to get something going, but Izzy's just too fast, too technical, too sharp for him. And it's an absolutely brilliant, a brilliant masterclass in defensive striking from Izzy. I mean, look at this. Look at the way that he moves. It's superb. It's so good. Every time Pereira tries to be the aggressor and really put it on Izzy, he can't get near him. It's a masterclass. And so I just think with Pereira being so much better of a striker than du Plessis, like if Izzy can do this to Pereira, I mean this could be one of the easiest fights of Izzy's career if he actually shows up and performs. Pereira landed a nice right hand there, but then he started feeling himself a little bit because he landed that clean hard shot. You can see he wants to be the aggressor, but he's not landing a whole lot. Comes forward now, looks to take Izzy out, and we all know what happens. Boom, headshot, dead. So yeah, man, this is an interesting fight. So we've obviously gone through a lot of stuff there. How do we bring this full circle and work out the best approach to this fight from a betting point of view? Well, I've already told you the best approach to this is live betting this fight. So hopefully you're in my live betting group this weekend. If not, hopefully what I'm about to say will help you choose what to do pre-fight or choose how to live bet this yourself. So I'm extremely tempted to bet Israel Adesanya. I just have to throw that out straight away because I think if the best version of both these guys show up, this will not be competitive at all. I think Israel Adesanya will utterly destroy du Plessis. I think he's just on a completely different level. But one thing that I've learned the hard way over the years is you cannot underestimate the importance of consistency and being tough and having a strong will to win. So when you look at Dricus du Plessis, for all of his weaknesses from a technical point of view, with him lacking physicality with his grappling, with his striking being very sloppy, what I love about du Plessis is that he'll always show up and fight for your money. He's very consistent, and he's tough as nails. He's got a strong will to win. What I really dislike about betting guys like Israel Adesanya is that they're very inconsistent. They put that, you know, if you bet on Israel Adesanya on any given night, he could show up and not really be feeling it, not try all that hard, and completely set fire to your money, right? We saw him do that in his last fight against Sean Strickland. He didn't show up, completely underperformed, never turned up that night. You know, never looked anything like he has in the past. If you look at his performance against Joel Romero a few years ago, pretty much the same thing happened. Yes, Izzy ended up winning a decision, but it was a very poor performance. And then the craziest thing of all was that Blachowicz fight. Because in the Robert Whittaker matchup, we saw him show a tremendous amount of urgency to work his way back up to his feet and defend takedowns, but yet against Jan Blachowicz just laid on his back doing absolutely nothing. So Izzy is a tough one to trust, because if we look at his last 7 fights, he hasn't shown up in 2 of them, right? 2 out of 7. Looked very bad against both Blachowicz and Strickland. And so that's quite a big percentage of chance that Izzy just may not turn up at all this weekend, right? Maybe he's lost the fire. You know, du Plessis has said that he thinks Izzy lost the fire. He doesn't see the fire in his eyes anymore. Maybe Izzy's on a decline. We already said, he's got a lot of miles on the clock. Izzy is a tough guy to trust. He is inconsistent. So, I guess a big part of my betting decision around this fight is, Izzy has alluded to himself being injured for the Strickland fight. I don't know what the fuck happened against Blachowicz. It was the worst performance of his career, in my opinion. But is it possible that Izzy was always that bad on the ground going into the Blachowicz fight, and then realised that how bad he was off his back basically cost him becoming a 2-division champion, and then he worked really, really hard on his wrestling, his takedown offense, his ability to work his way back up to his feet. And that's why he looked so good against Robert Whittaker, because there was a year in between these 2 fights, and Izzy did a lot of work on his defensive wrestling, takedown offense, and ground game to make such big improvements in that time. Is that what happened? I don't know. Was this an inconsistent performance, or is it actually a positive that Izzy improved so much off the back of it? And so a big part of betting this fight comes down to trying to predict what version of Izzy shows up, because I think this is Izzy's fight to lose. He is so much better than Dricus du Plessis that this really comes down to what version of Izzy we get, and how close to the best version of Izzy we've ever seen shows up on Saturday night, right? So, what have we got to look at in terms of trying to assess what version of Izzy we're going to get this weekend? Well, we can look at what he's been doing on Instagram. We can look at, the stuff he's been saying in interviews leading up to the fight. But outside of that, there's not a whole lot we can do. So what I would say is, obviously there's pictures of him here, wearing, some very fancy jewelry. Looks like he's on a private jet. And, was it George Foreman said it's hard to wake up at 5 a.m. in the morning, do rope work when you're sleeping in satin sheets. I think it was George Foreman anyway. Correct me if I'm wrong in the comments if it was someone else. But obviously Izzy's life has changed exponentially for the better, where, he's living pretty comfortable these days, right? And so it's going to be harder for him to train. It's going to be hard for him to be as motivated as du Plessis. Money probably isn't an object for him anymore, and because of that, he may have lost the fire, the passion for the game. But if we look at his training pictures, he looks to be in phenomenal shape. He looks to be very physically strong, in phenomenal shape. And like we said at the very beginning of this breakdown, now that there's very little USADA drug testing in the UFC, we could get the best version we've ever seen of Izzy this weekend. He certainly looks great here. And we've got some images here which are also quite interesting. So if we just skip through. This is obviously at City Kickboxing. But you can see he's posted some pictures of wrestling practice, man. Posted some pictures of wrestling. Again, it's just something small, but like I say, his takedown offense and ground game is brilliant when he wants it to be. When he doesn't accept being in bad positions. So what I would say is, if you want to bet this fight this weekend, I would take Izzy. I would take Izzy. I think he's the stronger side to be on. I think he's most likely to win. I am also very tempted to bet Izzy. I will not rule out the possibility that I may bet him in this fight. Obviously, if you are a member of my community on Discord, if you're a member of my website, I will post on there if I do decide to bet Izzy. But it's just one of those fights where, like with all my pre-fight bets, I've got principles in place which keep me out of trouble, right? And we perform really well on pre-fight betting over the long term. We've made nice, steady, consistent profits over the last 2 years. And one of the reasons we've been able to do that is by sticking to principles which keep us out of trouble and prevent us from placing bets that over the long term only tend to float around break even. And one of my core principles is to not bet on inconsistent fighters. Because when you bet on inconsistent fighters, sometimes they'll show up and do what you expect them to do, and other times they won't. And so it's hard to ever have a high degree of confidence in them showing up and doing what you want them to do. Because when you're inconsistent, they can't be trusted. Now, it's okay to bet inconsistent fighters at big underdog odds, because then you get a better risk to reward ratio. But I'm not sure if betting on a... Why has that happened? Sorry, guys. I'm not sure if betting on a guy in the even money odds range like Izzy that is inconsistent is the smartest thing to do. Again, let me know on Discord. Let me know what you think in the comments below. So I'm very tempted to bet Izzy. I might still bet Izzy for all the reasons that I've spoken about in this video. Let me know what you think in the comments below, or let me know what you think on Discord. So, in terms of the over-under on this fight, I do think over 3.5 rounds is reasonably likely to hit. But because Dricus du Plessis' striking defense is so poor, we've seen Izzy knock Alex Pereira out. We've seen him knock Robert Whittaker out. I wouldn't be surprised to see Izzy make du Plessis pay for one of his sloppy blitzing attacks. And as a result, I wouldn't be interested in betting the over here. But I do think the over 3.5 rounds most likely hits. I don't think du Plessis' ever been knocked out. He's been knocked out one time in 23 pro fights, and as we know, Izzy's not the most dangerous. He's a bit of a decisionator, and du Plessis is obviously a tough fucker. So in terms of the prop bets on this one, I do think Izzy by decision is the most likely outcome, but the odds are absolutely terrible. And the odds aren't that much better than, on Izzy to win by knockout or TKO. So probably give props a miss on that one. But yeah, it's a great fight. Let me know what you think of this fight. Will you be betting it? Do you think I should bet it? I know most people watching this are probably going to be on du Plessis because he is one of these guys that the MMA community just absolutely loves. And the MMA community absolutely hates Izzy. So I'm well aware the majority of the people watching this will call me a clueless fraud for thinking that, you know, Izzy is more likely to win. But yeah, let me know what you think, man. And if you do really like this breakdown video, please hit the like button and subscribe if you haven't already. It would really help the channel grow. The growth is so slow how competitive it is on YouTube. Put a lot of effort into these videos, so I'd really appreciate it if you could help me out by liking and subscribing. Now let's break down another amazing fight on this card, which is going to be Steve Erceg versus Kai Kara-France. So if we start off by taking a look at the odds on this one, we can see that Erceg is the favourite at average odds of about 1.61, which is going to be minus 164 for an implied probability of 62%. If we take a look at the odds on Kai Kara-France, he's around an average of, say, 2.35, which is going to be plus 135 for an implied probability of 43%. So Kara-France is 31 years old, 5'4", with a 69-inch reach. And Usyk is 29 years old, 5'8", with a 58.5-inch reach. So Usyk is quite a bit bigger than Kara France. They're both about the same age, both have about the same reach. So this is a super interesting fight, and at first glance, I definitely lean towards Kara France. The reason being, both these guys are primarily strikers, and Kara France is just a much more dynamic striker. He moves a lot better, he's got better footwork, he's more technical, I'd argue better defensively as well. He might not hit as hard as Steve Usyk. I think Usyk's got a bit more raw power, a bit more raw physicality, but Kara France is very good at making himself a moving target and circling away from his opponents and picking them off from the outside. So Usyk is obviously a flyweight. This fight's in the flyweight division, but Usyk is a little bit slow for a flyweight. So obviously the lighter weight classes are all about speed, reflexes and athleticism. And whereas Kara France is very mobile, very fast, very technical, Usyk fights like a guy in a higher weight class, which does make him a bit slow, a bit stuck in the mud, and this is why I favour Kara France. Ultimately, both these guys like to keep fights standing, and on the feet, Kara France is the more technical striker out of the two. That doesn't mean that Usyk hasn't got ways to win. Obviously, he does have home advantage on his side. He's Australian. Kara France is from New Zealand. This event is taking place in Perth, and so if this fight does end up being pretty close and competitive, obviously you'd think the judges would favour Usyk. Hometown judging is going to be, hometown advantage is going to be pretty big on a card like this. And the other way in which Usyk can win this fight is obviously through grappling. So we know that Kara France's biggest weakness throughout his career has been his takedown defense and ground game. And while his takedown defense has improved a lot over the years, Kara France is one of these guys that if you do get him down, if you do catch him in a bad position, he's pretty easy to control, and he does lack physicality on the ground. Now, Usyk is a decent MMA grappler, decently physically imposing on the ground. The problem with Usyk, and there's two problems with his grappling. The first is, just like he's stiff and slow with his striking, he's quite stiff and slow with his takedown entries as well, which makes him quite easy to read, and it makes it quite easy to stuff his takedowns. The second problem with his grappling is that he doesn't grapple enough. He doesn't shoot many takedowns. He prefers to stand and bang, and like I say, in a stand-up fight, I would favour Kara France. So this is one of those matchups where I do think it's going to be very close. I do think it's going to be very competitive. I do think it's a great fight for live betting. I don't see any massive advantages for either guy in this fight. Like I said, I think it'll be very close, very competitive. But I do lean towards Kara France because he's the better striker in what is likely to be a stand-up fight. However, Usyk hits harder. He's likely to be the guy coming forward. He's likely to be the aggressor. He does have the grappling advantage, and he also has home advantage. So hard to feel particularly confident in Kara France, but he is definitely my lean on this one. So if we take a look at the over-under, we can see the over is set at pretty steep favourite odds on this fight to go to decision. I would agree with that. I'd be very, very surprised if this fight ended inside the distance. Neither of these guys are that dangerous, and they're both pretty tough. They're both pretty durable. You can see, obviously, over the last few years, Kara France had a run of a lot of his fights ending inside the distance, but prior to that, he was an absolute decisionator. And if we look at Usyk, now that he's in the UFC and he's facing a step up in competition, he's gone to a decision in 3 of his last 4 as well. Both guys are tough, both are well-rounded, both pretty durable, both have got good cardio. Therefore, finishing this one's pretty unlikely. As for the props, the only prop I would consider would be Kara France by decision. But the odds in percentage terms aren't that much better than just betting Kara France money line. So if you really, really want to bet this fight, I would just say go for Kara France. And let me know what you think in the comments below. Do you agree? Will you be betting Kara France? How have the odds moved on this one? Kara France's odds are declining. I would have liked to bet Kara France in this odds range. Though, where he's currently at an implied probability of 43%. I don't like him as much, but I do definitely lean towards him. So now let's break down the next fight on this card, Mateusz Gamrot versus Dan Hooker. Earlier on in these series of breakdown videos, we were talking about how Dricus du Plessis is very highly thought of within the MMA community, and as a result, a lot of people misread his capabilities, his strengths and weaknesses, and I definitely see the same thing happening with Mateusz Gamrot. But does that mean that Dan Hooker can cause an upset here and pick up a big win in Australia. Let's dig into this fight, show you guys a little bit of footage and see what we think. So if we start off by taking a look at the odds on this one, obviously Gamrot is one of the biggest favourites on the card at average odds of about 1.29, which is going to be minus 345 for an implied probability of 78%. And if we take a look at the odds on Mr. Hooker, he's going to be around an average of 3.70, which is going to be plus 270 for an implied probability of 27%. So Gamrot is 33 years old, 5'10" with a 70.5-inch reach, and Hooker is 34 years old, 6 foot tall, with a 75.5-inch reach. So both these guys getting pretty old for lightweights. Hooker's been in a lot of wars. He's got a lot of miles on the clock. Gamrot definitely less. So there's not a big difference in the in the number of fights that both guys have got, but obviously, Hooker's been competing against the best lightweights in the world for a massive chunk of his career since he was in his early 20s, whereas Gamrot spent a lot of time outside of the UFC competing against a lower level opponent where he wouldn't have taken as much damage. So, we can see that in terms of the size and reach, Hooker has got a very nice 5-inch reach advantage, and obviously Hooker knows how to use that 5-inch reach advantage, which is great. But we also know that different body types have different strengths and weaknesses, and with Gamrot having that small, muscular, compact frame, when he shoots takedowns, that enables him to naturally shoot deep in on his opponent's legs. And with Hooker having that long, lean, lanky frame, obviously guys with his body type don't tend to have the best takedown defense because they tend to be quite weak in the lower body. Now, to be fair to Hooker, that's not really the case with him, even though he is pretty tall for a lightweight and he has a long body type. He is quite strong in the lower body, strong kicks, decent balance, all that kind of stuff. But Gamrot's offensive wrestling, the timing on his takedown entries is good, and so as a result, Hooker's going to have his work cut out keeping this one standing. So how do these two match up from a stylistic point of view? Well, in this series of breakdown videos for UFC 305 with Adesanya and Plessis in particular, we've been talking a lot about consistency and how we're not betting on robots, and how one of the most tricky aspects of betting on the sport of MMA is working out what version of a fighter we're likely to get on fight night. And Gamrot is another pretty inconsistent fighter because at times he looks absolutely terrible, and then at other times he looks capable of being a UFC champion. So if we take a look at his record, there is one very strange, very anomalous performance in his recent fights over the last few years, which doesn't make any sense to me, and I don't think I'm ever going to be able to explain it. But his fight against Arman Tsarukyan was utterly incredible. Gamrot looked like a potential UFC champion in that fight. He went hard for 5 rounds, grappled relentlessly, striking looked sharp, moved very well, and looked like a very, very, very high level UFC lightweight. Then, if you take a look at Gamrot's performances against Dos Anjos, or Turner, or Dariush, or Ferreira, or Guram Kutateladze, or even Scott Holtzman, he looks very sloppy, very bad cardio, lacks grappling control, lacks physicality to his grappling, and his striking is also pretty sloppy. So whenever we have a guy like this, I think a big mistake a lot of people make when they bet on fighters such as Gamrot is that their brain will kind of trick them into, or their brain will kind of talk them into whatever they want to tell themselves, right? So say, for example, they want to bet Gamrot, their brain will push the Tsarukyan fight to the forefront of their mind, and that's all they'll really be thinking about, because obviously the version of Gamrot that fought Tsarukyan would absolutely destroy Hooker. You know, if you told me right now you had a crystal ball that could see into the future, and you told me that this weekend Tsarukyan would show up and perform like he did, that Gamrot would show up and perform like he did against Tsarukyan, I would literally sell my house, my car, my kids, my dogs, my wife. I would sell it all and bet it on Gamrot, because it would be one of the safest bets in the history of sports. However, unfortunately, that is the only time Gamrot had looked anything remotely like he did in the Tsarukyan fight. Yet most people will assess Gamrot's strengths and weaknesses based on that matchup, whereas if you look at the big picture, Gamrot isn't particularly good. And if you go and watch a Beneil Dariush fight, or the Turner fight, or the Dos Anjos fight, or any of the other fights we've mentioned, you'll see that for yourself. No one remembers him becoming a panic wrestler against Dariush, getting lit up on the feet, looking sloppy and tired after just 7 or 8 minutes in that matchup. So for that reason, this is quite an interesting fight, because even though Gamrot should definitely be favoured in this fight, Hooker does have past the victories and things he can do to cause Gamrot a problem. So this is in many ways a classic striker versus grappler matchup, and if the fight stays standing, I would give Hooker the advantage, just so long as we don't get the version of Gamrot that fought Tsarukyan. If the version of Gamrot that fought Tsarukyan shows up, it doesn't matter what version of Hooker shows up. I think Gamrot will outstrike Hooker, he'll outgrapple Hooker, he'll do whatever he wants to do to Hooker. But obviously that is literally just one fight, and if we get the version of Gamrot we've seen in any of these other matchups, then I do think if Hooker can keep this fight standing, he will do very, very well, because Gamrot's one of these guys that is pretty bad defensively on the feet, doesn't have much power in his hands. Yes, he's got the odd knockout here and there. He's going to with 26 pro MMA fights. But generally speaking, Gamrot's more of a volume striker, a bit sloppy on the feet. And as the fight progresses and he tires out, he does become very hittable, very bad defensively on the feet. Whereas, Hooker's mean, nasty on the feet, lands nasty, hard, impactful shots. So it's a nice diverse range of attacks. He's got great leg kicks, knees down the middle, decent boxing, nasty elbows, he's nasty in the clinch, all that kind of stuff. So on the feet, if the version of both guys show up that we usually get, I would give Hooker the advantage here. So this fight is really going to come down to whether or not Gamrot is going to be able to get this fight to the ground and keep Hooker on the ground for long enough to have success with his grappling, because one of Gamrot's biggest issues in his fights is that he doesn't have the physicality to hold his opponents down. So he's a little bit like Dricus du Plessis, in that when he gets takedowns, he's not strong enough to hold them down, and quite often his opponents can quickly and easily work their way back up to their feet. Now, this is one of the areas in which people really misread Gamrot's capabilities, because there are a lot of people out there who think Gamrot is a very high-level MMA grappler. The Gamrot that fought Tsarukyan is, the Gamrot that fought everyone else is not. So if we're taking a big picture view of Gamrot's capabilities, his MMA grappling isn't particularly good. To the untrained eye that doesn't fully understand MMA grappling, Gamrot's grappling appears to be better than it actually is, because he's fought a lot of guys like Jalen Turner, or for example Rafael dos Anjos, who's in his late 30s now, who when he took them down, they kind of just laid on their back, accepted being on their back, accepted being on the bottom, didn't really make any effort to get back up to their feet, exactly like we saw from Adesanya in his fight against Blachowicz. But anytime Gamrot has fought someone who showed urgency to scramble back up to their feet, guys like Fiziev or Dariush or Diego Ferreira or Holtzman or Kuta Taladze, anytime we've seen Gamrot face guys like that, he has struggled. And one of the things we know about Gamrot is if you can quickly work your way back up to your feet when he takes you down, he's one of these guys that does burn through energy very quickly, and he does gas as fights play out. So when we are trying to predict the most likely outcome of this matchup, obviously what we're trying to do is we are trying to figure out whether Dan Hooker is going to be able to keep this fight standing. And what's crazy about Dan Hooker, and you do get situations like this pop up every once in a while, is that Hooker is one of these guys that even though he's had tons of fights in the UFC, we don't actually know very much about his takedown defense and ground game, which sounds like an insane thing to say because of how many fights he's had. But Hooker's one of these guys that has faced a large amount of strikers in his career and not many grapplers. I think that's probably because throughout the majority of Hooker's career, he was a bit of a bonus machine. He was one of those guys that you could match up with another striker and you're pretty much guaranteed to get a really entertaining fight. So because of that, the UFC probably milked his scrappiness, his toughness, and put him in against a lot of strikers. But because of that, even though he's had an ungodly amount of fights in the UFC, we don't know a whole lot about his striking. We can go back, Ian Entwistle, BJJ guy, Blanco, BJJ guy, Hatsu Hioki was actually a grappler, but then Yair Rodriguez striker, Adiva striker, Knight striker, Pearson striker, Chikese striker, Miller striker. The Gilbert Burns fight ended very quickly. Barboza striker, Vic striker, Alaya Quinta striker, Felder striker, Poirier striker. This ended very quick. There was no grappling. Hascrack striker. This fight ended very quickly. Arnold Allen fight ended very quickly. Puelos, I guess, is a grappler, but not the best offensive wrestler. Turner, a striker. So when you go throughout Hooker's entire career, it's not like he's fought a lot of wrestlers to give us a lot of information on his takedown defense and ground game. And the guys that are wrestlers, like a Michael Chandler or an Islam Makhachev, the fights haven't really lasted long enough for us to learn very much about his grappling. So what I do want to show you is a couple of clips of Hooker's takedown defense and ground game, so that you can kind of see what we're working with, and you can kind of see you know, what we do know about Hooker's takedown defense and ground game. So obviously Jalen Turner is primarily a striker, so we're not going to learn a whole lot about Hooker's grappling from this fight, but at the end of the day, all you can do is try and make the best betting decisions possible with the information we've got available. And so with us working with scraps here, we've got to look towards the Jalen Turner fight and anything else we can get our hands on to give us some clues. So in this third round, obviously momentum had swung in Hooker's favour. Turner was starting to find himself in a lot of trouble on the feet, so he did try to use some grappling to get this over the line. So you can see he shoots a nice double leg there, and Hooker gives it up very easily. He gives up a very cheap takedown and then does exactly what you don't want to see a fighter do, and just basically flop to his back and allows Jalen Turner to establish a dominant position. So Hooker does look very weak off his back here. You know, Jalen Turner's giving him a ton of space. You know, he could be trying to push off on Turner and get his back tight to the cage so that he can walk back up to his feet, or he could be trying to just straight up push Turner off with his feet so that he can scramble back up. But he hesitates a bit here and just allows Turner to rack up a bit of control time, then eventually does pop back up, but it's a bit unconvincing for me, and he did look pretty weak off his back there. Now if we skip through, that is pretty much it. So again, not a whole lot to work with. If we then take a look at his fight against Islam Makhachev, again, I don't want to be too harsh for what we see in this Makhachev fight, because Makhachev is levels and levels and levels and levels and levels and levels above Gamrot on the ground, particularly with grappling control and physicality. But again, we can see that Hooker does give up a very, very cheap takedown here any second there. Gives up a cheap takedown in the same way as he did against Turner. Now, to be fair to Hooker, he does scoot his butt over to the cage to put himself in a position to wall walk, but Makhachev just overwhelms him and basically eventually gets the Kimura. Again, you know, in Hooker's defense, obviously here he's facing one of the best MMA grapplers on the planet in Makhachev, but he did look pretty weak off his back. And even though he got taken down by Turner, Turner did kind of have the element of surprise on his side, because obviously Turner's a striker. That fight had been a stand-up fight. Turner hadn't attempted to take him down before he shot that takedown, and so Hooker wouldn't have been expecting a takedown attempt from Turner, which is possibly one of the reasons why he gave it up. But outside of that, we don't have a whole lot really to go on in terms of Hooker's takedown defense from recent years. So when we look at how these two match up stylistically, what I would say is, obviously Hooker does look like his takedown defense isn't the best. Potentially a bit weak off his back as well, but it is inconclusive. What I would say is that outside of Israel Adesanya and Alexander Volkanovski, a lot of the fighters that do train at City Kickboxing do have relatively bad takedown defense and not the best ground game. You think about guys like Brad Riddell, think about Kai Kara France, anyone else we can think of. I'm sure there are more that I can't think of off the top of my head, but City Kickboxing guys, not known for having the best takedown defense and ground game. So even though Hooker has had a long career in the UFC and he's very well rounded, if he's just going to give up cheap takedowns, then Gamrot is such a good offensive wrestler that he's going to be able to do what he did to Rafael dos Anjos in his last fight and just basically wet blanket Hooker, steal rounds with grappling, and just score big points from takedowns and not give Hooker the time and space he needs on the feet to actually score points with his striking and win a stand-up fight. So it's tough to feel confident on either guy here just because of where the odds are, because if you look at the odds on Gamrot, you know, 1.29 for an implied probability of 78%. In order to get any value on Gamrot, you've got to be giving him an 80% or better chance of winning, which is impossible when we don't really know a whole lot about Dan Hooker's takedown offense and ground game, apart from some small flashes, some small clips here and there. And we know that Gamrot has a tendency to gas very, very bad in fights when he can't hold guys down. And his grappling control is not the best. He's not the best at holding guys down. So, and again, there will be people shouting at the video now, telling me I'm wrong because he did this to RDA and he did that to Turner. Look, guys, this is a very, very complex game that we play, a very complex sport, and some fighters just choose to be in certain positions and don't show much urgency to work through them. So in the past, outside of the Tsarukyan fight, if you've seen Gamrot rack up a lot of top control against guys, it's often because they chose to be there. When you've actually seen anyone show urgency to work out of bad positions on the ground, Gamrot has put them in. He's struggled to maintain those dominant positions because he doesn't have physicality to his grappling. You can disagree all you want, but if you go learn MMA grappling, you go look at his past fights, you'll see the same thing as me. The only place you find truth and honesty in this game is the fight footage. It doesn't lie. So with Gamrot being a massive favourite, and with us not knowing a whole lot about Hooker's takedown offense and ground game, it is impossible to bet on Gamrot in this odds range. He would be a very, very bad bet to trust him as a big favourite. The risk to reward ratio is just very bad. But in terms of Hooker, obviously, with him being an underdog, you can afford to, with him being such a big underdog at an implied probability of 29%, you can afford to gamble a bit more. You can afford to make a few more assumptions, take some more risks. But, you know, at the end of the day, from the footage we've got of the Turner fight, the Makachev fight, he does look quite weak off his back. We know Gamrot likes to spam takedowns and is very persistent at wet blanketing his opponents in the clinch. So do you really want to be rolling the dice on a guy like Hooker, who may have bad takedown offense, who may have bad ground game, against a tough guy like Gamrot that's going to relentlessly spam takedowns for 15 minutes? For me, that's not a particularly strong position for me to put my money, so that isn't a bet I would personally be interested in. I think this fight is an easy pass. But if you really, 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 really want to bet this fight, because of where the odds are, I think you have to take Hooker, because at the bigger underdog odds, he's giving you the better risk to reward ratio on the basis that Gamrot's a relatively easy fighter to game plan for, because he's not really going to cause you too much of a problem with his striking unless he performs like he did against Tsarukyan, but that's rare. So he's not really going to cause you many problems with his striking, and his grappling is quite predictable, especially when he gets tired. He shoots from very far outside of his opponent's range. So based on that, I would try and play into the chaotic random variance of MMA and take the big underdog, especially because he'll likely have the crowd behind him. With him being from New Zealand, he'll have the Aussie fans behind him. Gamrot's style of fighting is also pretty boring, so maybe the ref will hook Hooker. I can't even say that. Maybe the ref will hook Hooker up with some stand-ups or separations in the clinch if the crowd start getting restless with, Gamrot just trying to wet blanket him and run the clock down. So in terms of the over-under on this, very, very likely the fight goes the distance. Both guys are tough. Both are well-rounded. Gamrot's not really that dangerous. A lot of people think he is, but he's more of a decisionator. Hooker can be dangerous, but hasn't looked that dangerous in a long time. There was a point in his career where he was landing, big knockouts on everyone and killing them. But it's been a long time since we saw that side of him. So I think very likely this fight goes deep, and very likely the overs hit. But the odds are way too steep for me to consider betting them. In terms of the prop bets on this fight, the most likely outcome, I believe, is Gamrot by decision. But the odds are absolutely terrible. The odds are absolutely terrible. What are the odds on Hooker to win in round 3? Because obviously Gamrot does slow down if fights wear on. Do we have the odds on that? We do. Around 24.0 plus 2,300. So if you want to gamble, if you want to sprinkle a little bit of money on this fight, just to make watching more interesting, this isn't particularly likely to hit. But obviously when we're talking about bets in this odds range, bets in this odds range don't need to win a particularly high percentage of the time to earn a good long-term profit. We know Gamrot slows. Hooker will likely have the crowd behind him. Gamrot's prone to adrenaline dumping. If Hooker can keep the fight standing, we know Hooker likes to pour it on and try and get late finishes. If we look at Hooker's record, he does have some third-round finishes. over the years. Not many, but there are some buried in there. So, you know, whenever you've got a guy with questionable cardio like Gamrot, it doesn't hurt to take the round 3 bets on their opponent from time to time. It's not something I'll be betting, but if you want to gamble, I've seen worse at at odds ranges such as that. So, hope you found that useful. Let me know what you think in the comments below. Now let's break down the next fight on this card, which is going to be Jairzinho Rosenstruik versus Tuivasa. So if we start off by taking a look at the odds on this one, we can see that Rosenstruik is the favourite at average odds of about 1.44, which is going to be minus 227 for an implied probability of 69%. And if we take a look at the odds on Tuivasa, he's around an average of 2.80, which is going to be plus 180 for an implied probability of 36%. So Tuivasa is 31 years old, 6'2", with a 75-inch reach, and Rosenstruik, 36 years old, 6'2", with a 78-inch reach. So both guys about the same size. Rosenstruik is a bit older, but in the context of this fight, I don't think it matters all that much, because to me at least, Rosenstruik isn't showing any signs of decline. He's not really that old for a heavyweight anyway. So when I first saw this matchup, Tuivasa was one of the first names that jumped out at me as a potential bet, because from my perspective, you've got two, heavy-handed, knockout artists in the heavyweight division here. We know that Tuivasa has got a granite chin. We know he's tough as nails. We know he's going to have the crowd behind him and home advantage. And Rosenstruik has been a bit passive at times, a bit tentative, doesn't throw particularly high volume of strikes, and is very one-dimensional. So I thought Tuivasa at underdog odds could be a really good bet. But when I researched this fight, I was surprised at how much my opinion changed and how much I ended up really liking Rosenstruik in this matchup. I think this is a very good stylistic matchup for Rosenstruik after taking a good look at it. So it is a shame that Rosenstruik is such a big favourite, because I don't think it is smart to bet heavyweights at implied probabilities of about 70%, because ultimately almost every heavyweight in the division has got the power to knock anyone else out in the division if just one clean hard shot lands. It's a difficult path to walk being profitable long term on big favourites in heavyweight fights. But when you look at how these two match up stylistically, it is a very difficult stylistic matchup for Tuivasa. So what's nice about analysing this fight is, for the first time in a long time, when we are breaking down a fight between these two, we don't really need to talk very much about grappling, because neither of these guys ever tried to take their opponents down. They are pure grapplers. Now, if we are to see any grappling in this fight, it's more than likely going to be because Tuivasa looks to switch things up and use the element of surprise on Rosenstruik and try to take him down. But as we've seen in some of Rosenstruik's recent fights, the Gaziev matchup in particular, Rosenstruik is making big improvements to his takedown defense. So even if Tuivasa wanted to get this fight to the ground, I don't think he would be able to. This is, for the most part, going to be a stand-up fight. And the reason why I like Rosenstruik in this matchup, if it stays standing, is that he's just a much more technical striker, a much more skilled striker than Tuivasa. It's not until you go back and you actually watch footage of Tuivasa in the cold light of day that you realise how sloppy his technique, how bad his boxing is. Yes, he's got a very heavy kicking game. His leg kicks are absolutely devastating, but his boxing's very sloppy. He's poor defensively, he's wild, he's reckless, and he throws big winging hooks from the hips. Rosenstruik is very technical. He's got a good jab, throws nice, fast, accurate, straight punches. And while Rosenstruik doesn't throw a particularly high volume of strikes, he is a very good counter striker. And with how wide open Tuivasa is on the feet, I think he'll be wide open to big counters from Rosenstruik. Now, one area on the feet where Tuivasa can have success is with his leg kicks. He's got a very heavy, a very good leg kick game. Lands heavy, nasty, damaging, impactful leg kicks. And Rosenstruik is quite weak in the lower body. He does have pretty skinny legs, which is one of the reasons why his takedown defense is so bad. So if Tuivasa does go to the leg kick game, he can inflict a lot of damage on Rosenstruik and cause him a lot of problems. However, Rosenstruik's a much better boxer, and so I just think he's going to be too technical for Tuivasa and will likely land the harder, more damaging head strikes, which will be the difference in this matchup. Now, Tuivasa is good at causing chaos, good at dragging guys into brawls and wars. I'm not sure that Rosenstruik is the kind of guy you want to be dragging into a fight like that, because what we have seen with Tuivasa in recent fights where he's tried to kind of brawl with guys like Volkov and Pavlovich is that, and even Cyril Gane, is that it's backfired, and his lack of technique and his recklessness has got him into trouble. I mean, he even got dropped by Alexander Volkov, which led to the Ezekiel choke, which isn't good because Volkov isn't known for having knockout power. So I'm not saying that's, you know, Tuivasa's chin going or anything like that. I'm just saying he's very wild, he's very reckless, and the best heavyweights in the world will make you pay for it. You can get away with it when you're facing these lower level guys, but now that Tuivasa is facing that step up in competition, he's finding it difficult because he hasn't got the technique to fall back on. So it's a good stylistic matchup for Rosenstruik. He should get the job done. So in terms of the over-under on this one, I would be surprised if this fight went to a decision. Obviously, both guys have got true legit one-shot knockout power. They're both dangerous. They both want the 50 Gs, and Tuivasa is very wild and reckless, and will look to drag Rosenstruik into a war where someone's going to get knocked the fuck out. Having said that, from a value perspective, I do think the over 1.5 rounds does present a better opportunity for betting than the under, simply because the odds are better, and a lot of the time when you get two guys that are as dangerous as this, a lot of the time when you do get guys as dangerous as this, they will show each other a lot of respect. They'll respect one another's power, and they may start a little bit slower and just kind of feel each other out and chip away at one another without wanting to take risks to land a knockout, because obviously when you put yourself in a position to knock your opponent out, you also put yourself in a position to be knocked out. So sometimes when you get two heavy hitters like this, you can get cagey sort of stylistic matchups like Derek Lewis versus Francis Ngannou, which could help the over hit. It's not something I'll be betting, but I would prefer to bet over 1.5 rounds at 2.50 plus 150 than the under 1.5 rounds at about 1.50 minus 200. The over 1.5 just gives you a better risk to reward ratio, in my opinion, even if it isn't the most likely outcome. So in terms of prop bets, I do think the most likely outcome is Rosenstruik by knockout or TKO, but the odds are absolutely terrible. So as a backup, if you wanted to go something crazy, you might want to go for something like Rosenstruik to win by knockout or Rosenstruik to win by decision, on the basis that if you do get a cagey, close, tentative matchup where both guys are afraid to open up, you could see Rosenstruik just using his superior technique to chip away at Tuivasa for 3 rounds. And also on top of that, Tuivasa is a tough guy with a good chin who's not easy to put away. We saw the Cyril Gane fight almost go a full 15 minutes. Maybe Rosenstruik will chip away at Tuivasa in the same way that he did to Gaziev, and that fight lasted 20 minutes, and take down a decision. Or maybe just go for Rosenstruik by decision, 8.50 plus 750. It's not the most likely outcome. The most likely outcome is Rosenstruik by knockout or TKO, but the odds on that absolutely suck for a prop. So if you want to mix it up, gamble a bit more, give yourself a better risk to reward ratio, Rosenstruik by decision would be the way to go, in my opinion. So I hope you found that useful. Let me know what you think in the comments below. And now let's break down the next fight on this card, which is going to be Jingliang versus Carlos Pratez, the Nightmare. And he is a nightmare indeed. He's looked very good in his fights so far. So if we start off by taking a look at the odds on this one, we can see that Pratez is one of the biggest favourites on the card at average odds of about 1.29, which is going to be minus 345 for an implied probability of 78%. If we take a look at the odds on his opponent, Jingliang, he's around an average of 3.75, which is going to be plus 275 for an implied probability of 27%. So Jingliang is 36 years old, 6 foot tall with a 72-inch reach, and Pratez is 30 years old, 6 foot 1 with a 78-inch reach. So we can see that Pratez is He's not only 6 years younger than Li Jingliang, which is pretty meaningful because at 30 years old, he's in his prime. He's going to be making big improvements from fight to fight. Whereas at 36 years old, Li Jingliang is getting pretty old for the welterweight division. As a result, should be starting to decline from fight to fight now. But not only that, but Pratez also has a very nice 6-inch reach advantage, and he fights long and he knows how to use it. So that reach advantage is pretty big in a matchup like this, and statistically gives Pratez around about a 67% chance of winning. Fighters with a 6-inch reach advantage win around 67% of the time. So that doesn't quite justify Pratez's steep odds that carry an implied probability of 78%, but it does certainly mean that this is going to be a tricky fight for Li Jingliang for all the reasons that we'll get into now. So both these guys are predominantly strikers. I don't think I've ever seen Carlos Pratez shoot a takedown. You can see him with a Muay Thai tattoo on his chest there. Pratez is a pure striker that likes to keep fights standing. Li Jingliang is also a pure boxer that likes to keep fights standing. But if there were to be any grappling in this matchup, I think it would be Li Jingliang trying to take Pratez down. We did see him try to take Neil Magny down. Outside of that, you don't get a whole lot of grappling from Li Jingliang. He likes to stand and bang. But if he is getting lit up on the feet, he may start to try and take Pratez down to kind of take the fight to an area where he isn't going to be taking so much damage. Now, Li Jingliang is not the best offensive wrestler. He's quite low level on the ground. So even if he wanted to grapple here, I don't think he would be able to, because while Pratez's takedown offense isn't the best, he is quite difficult to hold down. And I don't think Jingliang has the kind of ground game to be able to hold a guy like Pratez down. Pratez is pretty tricky to hold down. So in terms of how these two match up on the feet, it is an interesting one. You can never count a guy like Jingliang out of a cage fight to the death, because he is tough, he is durable, he does hit hard, and he's not afraid of getting dragged into a crazy war. Having said that, defensively he's not the best. He does have a habit of getting dinged in fights, and we know Pratez is an absolute sniper on the feet, true legit knockout power, very technical, very accurate, very fast, knows how to use his length. So I wouldn't rule out the possibility that Jingliang could land a bomb on Pratez, cause an upset, make this very interesting, but it certainly isn't all that likely, because Pratez is the better striker, he uses his length well, he is better defensively, and Jingliang is very wild, very reckless, very bad defensively, and does tend to get dinged a lot in fights. Jingliang is also quite predictable, or not predictable, but he's a bit one-dimensional. He doesn't throw too many kicks, he's much more of a boxer. And so we know Pratez has a nice diverse range of strikes, throws a decent volume, and can be pretty aggressive. So it's a good fight for Pratez. It's one of those fights where he deserves to be a big favourite. He should win pretty easily. I'm not interested in betting him in this odds range, just because in order to get any value you'd have to cap him at 80% or better, which I can't do because he fights with his hands low and he loves to stand and bang, and Jingliang can crack. So for me, you can't cap him at better than 80%, which means you know, you'd be crazy to bet Pratez in this odds range, but it doesn't change the fact that he should win a very high percentage of the time, probably around this percentage to be fair. And I certainly wouldn't want to be betting Li Jingliang this weekend. So for people that just gamble for fun, place bets for fun, don't care a whole lot about implied probabilities and all that stuff, you know, I guess Pratez is one of those guys who is safer than some of the other big favourites to throw into your parlays this week. For example, I think it's far more likely Pratez wins than Gamrot. However, you know, just know that you're not putting your money in a strong position mathematically if you do take Pratez. There's no value here. Very difficult to cap him at 80% or better. But I hope you found that breakdown useful. If you did, please hit the like button and subscribe if you haven't already. I would love to grow this channel. It takes a lot of work, a lot of time, a lot of work to make these breakdown videos. So you'd be helping me out a lot if you could like and subscribe. And also, check out the links below. Seriously consider joining my live betting group, because I think we are about to enter a golden age for live betting on the UFC due to some technical problems that I've fixed recently. The future is bright. There's a lot of money to be made. We've absolutely printed over the last 8 years. And I just think it's a very, very good opportunity, and you're not going to be disappointed, because we do great over the long term. If you watch every UFC event live, it's a bit of a no-brainer. So thank you very much for watching. Take care, everybody. I love you all. I'll see you all very soon. Nice one, guys. Take care. Bye.